So I want to continue experimenting with the capabilities of simulation before I start designing my Rube Goldberg machine. And one of the things that I've done is I have a notepad next to me, and I've jotted down a couple of things that I want to experiment with. And I have a list of about 10 things that include a domino, screw, catapult, a long list of things. And my goal is for each note that I've jotted down, I want to experiment and see if I could figure out a solution how to implement that based on the simulation tools in Cinema 4D. So the next thing that I want to attempt is a series of dominoes falling. And there's a couple of different ways that I suspect I can do this, but in order to get the ball rolling, I could copy and paste all of this content into a new document, but what I'm going to do is I'm going to do a quick file save as. In fact, before I do that, I'm going to make sure that I've saved the most recent version. I'll do a file save as, and I'm going to save this as Domino 01. And so I don't need all of this stuff. In fact, I'm going to get rid of the second ball. I'm going to keep the first ramp. I'm going to get rid of all the other ramps, and I'm just going to move the ramp group, the ramp and the ball, down closer to the ground. And I'm going to rewind that, and I'm going to hit play. And I'm going to pause right about here, and I'm going to introduce a marker. And this is just kind of a visual reference. I'm just going to make a little piece of geometry. And I'm going to place that roughly at the point of impact where the ball hits the ground. Okay, and that's just kind of a visual reference. I know the ball is going to pass through that point. I don't have any dynamics applied to that, so I just have a point in space that I can reference. The next thing I'm going to do is I'm going to set up a cube, and I'm going to just kind of get a rough domino shape. So I'm going to play with some values here. I'm not sure what the proportion is going to be. Actually, I didn't want to do that. I wanted to do this along X. Maybe I'll do a little bit of research and look up the proportions of a domino, but I think I'll just eyeball it. Let's say, that looks pretty good. Okay, and I'm going to move that closer to the ground. I could just kind of eyeball this and see where that intersects, but I really want this as close as possible without intersecting the ground, so I'm going to go into a flat view. I'm going to tap the S key, and this will get me pretty close. I don't want those intersecting, because if they do, I think I might get some really weird results with the rigid body. So I'm just going to float the domino just above that line, and I'll go back to my perspective viewport. Now, I'm going to select my domino. I'll call it domino. And I'll apply a rigid body to it. So go to Dynamics, Rigid Body. I'm going to rewind the playhead and I'll hit play. And right off the bat, looks like things are working pretty well. So my ball runs into my domino and it starts to tip it over. And my domino's huge compared to my ball, so I'll probably change that a little bit. I'm going to rewind the playhead. I'll change this size just a bit. Maybe I'll take this to 250, this to 100, and this down to 10. Okay, not sure that that's in proportion, but I think that'll give me the results that I want, at least for this prototype here. So I'm just going to move this down and do the same thing. I'm just going to stand it right up above the ground plane, and again, just going to continue to experiment with this. So it wobbles a little bit, that domino. It wobbles a bit when that simulation runs, and that might mean that I need to get a little bit closer to the ground so that it doesn't inadvertently tip over when I start the simulation. But I think things are working okay. Now I want the ball to hit this domino closer to the top. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to select the ball on the ramp. I'm going to rewind the playhead, otherwise I can't move it. And I'll just move this up and away. So I didn't really need that marker there, but there's going to be some points when I want to mark in space where the ball is going to travel, so that when I run a longer simulation, I can run it one time, pause the playhead, and mark that point. So, okay, so that looks pretty good. I kind of like that, how it's falling over. There's a little bit of weirdness going on here, and I think that if I copy the domino, I'll Command C and Command V, and I'll make a duplicate and kind of move that out in space. If I rewind the playhead and hit play, the thing that's a little strange to me is how this domino is tipping over. It's pivoting around its center mass, which is really the way that we want it. The bottom's kicking out a little bit more aggressively than I want it to. And I don't really want to change the mass. But what I do want to do is I really want the pivot point. I want the effect of the domino tipping over and it pivoting more towards the bottom. Now I could play around with artificially influencing the center of mass. If I start to play around, let me go to domino. And I'll go into the dynamic bodies and I'll look in the basic properties. There's nothing there. Dynamics, that's exactly the way that I want things. I'm going to go into collision. That all looks pretty good for now. I'll come back to this here in just a minute. I'm going to go to mass. Now, this is... I don't want to do this, okay? But I'm just going to experiment for the sake of the demo. I'm going to turn on custom center. And this would be the X field, this would be Y, and this would be Z. So I'm going to make this negative 100. I think, if my memory serves correct, my height is about 200 or 250. So I'm artificially moving the center of mass down lower. Now when I run the simulation, it definitely tips the way that I want it to, but there's a center of mass that's floating down here, and we run the risk of that domino actually standing back up. In fact, if I make this negative 200, look at that. Kind of springs back up. So there's kind of like a weight down here, and there's an intersection point here. So this is not what I want to do. I'm going to turn custom center off, and look at that. In real time, it's affecting the way that my domino is being simulated. What I can do, more appropriately, what I want to do is I'm going to go into the collision tab, and this is where friction comes into play. I want more friction between the domino, the intersection between the domino and the floor. So I'm going to take the friction field and I'm going to bump that up, and I'm not sure how this is going to affect it, so I'll just ramp it way up to 80% and I'll hit play. It's still kicking out a bit, so let me bump it up to 100%. So I have 100% friction. Now remember, the floor object has some friction as well, and that's a little bit more accurate. Okay, a lot of that has to do with how and where I'm hitting that domino with this ball, what the mass of the ball is. There's a lot of experimentation to take into consideration, but I'll take that friction back down to, not 580, but to 80, and I'll rewind and hit play. And by the way, because I'm using the same document, I don't have to bump up my frame rate, but a lot of times when I experiment and I leave my end frame at 90, the simulation doesn't run all the way before it resets. So I want to make sure that I have enough frames. I may not need 900, but that gives me definitely more than enough frames to test this thing out. So I like my first domino. I don't want to have to duplicate some of the attributes for the second domino, so I'm going to trash the duplicate. I'm going to rewind the playhead. I'll copy the first domino and paste the second. So at this point, I could manually just start adding all the dominoes that I want. Or I could potentially duplicate these in a much more meaningful way, and we can experiment with that really quickly. There's a couple of different ways I could do this. Of course, just about anything. Cinema 4D is very intuitive, so I should be able to select Domino 1, go to Functions and Duplicate, and just a standard duplication in linear fashion. I don't want to duplicate up in space, so I'm going to zero out the Y value. Let's try 100 along the X, and if I want more copies, I could make more copies, but already that's actually pretty good. Let me just kind of spread those out a little more. Now, once I OK this or move beyond this, I'm kind of stuck with this duplication, but I've ended up with a bunch of duplicates, domino duplicates, because it had my rigid body tag already assigned to it. All those duplicates inherited the same properties, so I could very quickly create a bunch of dominoes, distribute those in space, and now I got a pretty effective simulation. So I'm pretty happy with my domino simulation. I could definitely play around with this a little bit more, and in fact, the only other thing that I want to do is I think I want to make a copy of the ball. And I want to see if I can get this ball to move based on a domino kind of giving it a little shove. So let me rewind the playhead and hit play. And with any luck, that domino is going to fall and push that ball forward. Cool. So now I gotta I gotta trigger a series of events that I can build upon. One last thing, I'm just going to borrow one of my dominoes, and maybe I'll add to the domino chain. I'm going to rewind the playhead, make sure I pause it and rewind it. I'm going to select one of the dominoes, one of the dominoes that I duplicated. Maybe I'll take the first one and I'll Command C and Command V. So now I have a duplicate. Okay, and I'll move that over in space. One additional thing that I can do with the duplicate function is I'm going to look through a top-down view. I'm going to zoom out just a little bit. And what I'll do is I'll go to the freehand spline and I'm just going to draw a simple path. Okay? And if you remember way back in the 3D design class, we have the ability to select an object, choose function, and duplicate. And instead of using a linear mode, we could do along a spline. And so when we drag that spline in, I'm going to bump that up to 8 copies. I'm going to hit apply. And I got a little glitch in that my spline is too low. Okay. But I'll be able to correct for that in just a minute. While I'm here, I want to make sure that I have enough duplicates. And I also got, you know, something kind of funny going on in that my dominoes aren't rotating in space, and so if I don't want to enable rotation, excuse me, I want to enable rotation, but I don't want to rotate along Y. Let's try X. There we go. Okay, so they're rotating per step along Y, and I think I can just let everything else default. So with any luck, let's see, I'm just going to select my original domino and the domino copies, and I should be able to go to the move tool and lift this out of the floor. So let me just go into my split view. I'll look at this from the side. There we go. And I'll just move these up. I'm going to zoom way in, kind of move those back down just, they're sitting right above the floor. And I'll go back. Now, I don't know if this ball is actually going to push into there. What I might do is just duplicate my ball and my ramp. I'm going to make a quick copy, quick paste, and I'll move that scenario over and just line it up to where I think it's going to run into that second set of dominoes. And I'll hit play. And I missed. Right? Got a few things I got to do, got some tweaking to do, but you get the idea. So I'm going to go back and give this some more attention. I got lucky over here. So I probably needed more dominoes. I needed to close the space here, but I do have a scenario that I could build upon. So I'm happy with my dominoes. Because that duplication was an error, I could just keep the spline and get rid of all the domino copies, and I could rerun that duplication. But again, I'm happy with the domino for now, and I'm going to move on to the next experiment.